Morning, folks. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Junior doctors in England walk out in a second 24-hour strike over changes to their contract, especially overtime pay at weekends. They're providing only emergency care. Is there any end in sight to the doctors' dispute?
Is there a level playing field in British politics? The government says it wants to cut the cost of politics and make it fairer. But are they changing the rules for home advantage?
It's plentiful, it's cheap, it's tasty. So what's not to like? But can a vegan be persuaded of the virtues of mass-produced meat?
And leave or remain? Why a simple question is so difficult for Eurosceptic Conservatives to answer.
But yeah, let's wait and see when this whole thing is agreed and try and see what it really means, every bit of it. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's pretty clear where he stands. Anyway, all that in the next 90 minutes. With us for the duration, Shadow Environment Secretary Kerry McCarthy, Schools Minister Nick Gibb. Welcome to you both. Now, last night, Nick was engaged in a Twitter spat with pop singer Lily Allen over Pythagoras' theorem, with Nick asserting that the importance of the theory in getting on in life. So you know what the Pythagorean equation is, Nick?
In a right-angle triangle, the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square on the other two sides. Or should I have taken the Nicky Morgan defence?
No, that's
correct.
That's pretty good.
You swat. Now, junior doctors in England have begun a second 24-hour strike over changes the government wants to make to their contracts. In return for an increase in their basic pay, ministers want to reduce extra payments made to junior doctors for working in the evenings and at the weekend. But the Doctors' Union, the British Medical Association, says that overall the changes will still leave their members worse off and, they say, endanger patient safety. Well, we're joined now from Milton Keynes by Dr. David Rouse, who is the Deputy Chairman of the BMA's Junior Doctors Committee. Welcome to the Daily Politics. One of the main areas of disagreement, as we've said, is whether Saturday should be classified as a normal working day. Why isn't Saturday a normal working day as far as you're concerned?
I mean, I think it's because of our members say so. They have family commitments and they have caring commitments that extend well into the weekend and into antisocial hours. So our membership are telling us that Saturdays for them should be protected.
Right. I mean, the Conservatives believe Saturday should be treated as a normal day if they are to meet their manifesto commitment, which was to introduce a 7-day NHS. Do you acknowledge that mandate?
I think that a 7-day NHS is important, but I think we have to realise that junior doctors are already providing good quality emergency care 7 days a week to the NHS.
But not equally across the board.
I think emergency care is of very good quality in the UK and the NHS provides this very well. If you were to look at elective care and providing that over 7 days, then that will require more doctors on the ground and more money. You can't simply take doctors from the weekend and spread them over 7 days and expect the care to remain the same. Our junior doctors want a fair, safe contract for patients that allows them to provide good quality care at all times, and this is what the BMA are fighting for.
If Saturdays were treated differently in the way they are now to a certain extent, and you were still to get that 11% basic pay increase, do you think all junior doctors would drop this strike and go back to work?
I think this is an important issue. I mean, this is not just about weekend pay. We overall think that this contract is unsafe for patients, and it's about weekday plain time as well. We do not believe that working at 9 p.m. on a Friday evening is the same as working at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. There are other issues to this that we feel will lead to increased burnout in junior doctors, tired doctors working, and therefore decreased patient safety. This is not just about weekend working.
Right, so even if that was to be maintained, the sort of contract as it is, it wouldn't be enough for you at this stage now. You would want recruitment drives to heighten the number of doctors and nurses and radiologists, for example, across weekends, as well as actually keeping Saturday sacrosanct for your junior doctors.
I think this is about safety. You're making good points. This is not just about having junior doctors in at the weekend. If this was to be a truly 7-day NHS, we would need other forms of healthcare professional available at the weekend as well, such as radiographers and nurses. This all requires money. What the BMA is saying, what junior doctors are saying, is that the changes that are trying to be imposed by the government we feel and junior doctors feel are unsafe fundamentally, and this is why that we are here today on strike whilst providing good quality emergency care for patients today as well. Junior doctors don't do this lightly. They don't go on strike lightly. They are here because they are angry and they want to provide safe care for their patients, not just now, but for generations to come. We want to protect the NHS. And this is why our junior doctors are here today. And so, yes, you know, this is about the NHS as well as about junior doctors.
Right. I mean, the government says it'll just impose the new contract. What will you do then?
I think if the government move to impose, our members will continue to fight this. We have to continue to fight this. Our door is always open. We want to go back to talks. We want to go back to fair talks, though. Talks with the threat of imposition looming over junior doctors are not fair talks. And we want the government to see sense and come back to the table and compromise with us to be able to provide a contract that's safe for doctors, safe for patients, and ultimately safe for our NHS.
So we could just see rolling strikes if they impose it?
I think that further action would need to be discussed and discussed with membership, but whatever action we take, we will ensure that it's safe for patients. Like today, we are taking emergency care only action, and we have got senior doctors providing care, quality care for patients right now. You know, this is about providing safe patient care, and that's what we want for the future, and this is why we are here taking strike action today.
David Rouse, thank you.
Nick Gibb, is this strike about the safety of care in the NHS, or is it about the overtime rate on Saturday?
It's about safety. It's about a 7-day-a-week health service. We made it very clear in the manifesto we wanted a 7-day-a-week health service. We know that if you are ill on a weekend, you're less likely to be as well treated as you would be if you were ill during the week.
The figures, as you know, the figures are disputed.
Well, there are a third fewer doctors on the rotas at weekends than there are during the week. And, you know, it'd be far easier for government just to sit here and not reform this public service, but we have a commitment to reform it, and we are doing so. And what we're seeing here are the vested interests fighting against those reforms. The same things we see in education when we're reforming education. We see resistance from the teacher unions, and here we're seeing resistance from the medical union, the BMA.
But was it ever realistic to extend the NHS into a kind of all singing, all dancing 7-day-a-week operation on existing budgets? I mean, surely by definition you would need more money to be able to do on a Sunday what you would normally do on a Tuesday.
Well, there is more money going into the health service, something that we can do because we have a strong economy. We're able to put more money into the National Health Service. Well, that's what these renegotiations are about, ensuring that, and again, there's no pay cuts for junior doctors. There's 11% rise.
But the overall pay pot's not rising.
It is not rising.
So there's no more money going in.
But what we do expect are for doctors to be on call and to be available 7 days a week. That's the purpose of these contracts.
So therefore, why wouldn't you pay them overtime? I mean, Saturday is a day when people would expect to be paid overtime, and you intend to pay them the same weekly rate between the hours of 7 in the morning and 5 at night on a Saturday.
But there will be extra pay beyond 5 o'clock. There's extra pay for Sundays.
But Saturday doesn't start at 5 o'clock. Saturday starts at midnight.
There are many workers in all kind of industries who do work at weekends. And what
but many of them also get overtime.
And the doctors will get overtime after 5 p.m. and they'll get overtime on the Sunday.
But why wouldn't you give them overtime for a Saturday? I mean, it may not be at a huge rate, but surely you would recognise that Saturday is different. You're wanting more of them to work on a Saturday, and therefore they should be paid more than the basic rate they get for the weekdays.
This is all part of the negotiations that includes an 11% rise in the basic pay for junior doctors. And Sir David Dalton, who's been conducting these negotiations on behalf of the NHS, has said that they were very close to an agreement, very, very close to an agreement. So the idea now that they're going on strike, they're threatening more strikes, is irresponsible. That's not how we should be handling these important discussions about how we have a safer health service with doctors spending fewer hours in the wards, so it's safer in terms of the extra hours they've been doing. It's safer that we have a 7-day health service. That's what we're determined to reform and determined to achieve, because that's what we set out in our manifesto. And this isn't the way that any union should be handling these negotiations. You
clearly wouldn't want to start from here, but we are where we are. What would you now do to end this strike? Would you offer them Saturday as an overtime day?
Well, I think the important thing is not for politicians to negotiate, it's for people to get round the table, the BMA, and listen to what the junior doctors are saying. Well, Jeremy, as I understand it, there was a deal that was almost reached, but Jeremy Hunt vetoed it.
But we
very
don't know
recently,
that.
and-
I've seen these reports. Problem
Yeah.
is, we don't know that.
No, but we've heard that Jeremy Hunt is seen as the obstacle to them reaching a deal. And I think the important thing is to actually listen to what junior doctors are saying. These are, I spent a day before Christmas shadowing junior doctors in one of my local hospitals. And these are people that are absolutely dedicated to the work they do. They're already working much longer hours than they are being paid for because, they don't just walk away from the job when, at 5 o'clock and down
Sure,
tools.
but should they be paid? Should they be paid an overtime rate on Saturdays?
Well, Saturdays is unsocial hours, so I think that I think that's something that they should be compensated for.
And you think if they did that, that would end the dispute, or would be
No, well, I think
a long way towards it?
I think that's part of it. I mean, there's some discussion about perhaps the extra payment starting at midday on a Saturday, but certainly junior doctors, most of them will work at least one weekend in 3 at the moment anyway. It's not that they don't want to take part in this 7-day-a-week NHS, it's that they want people to recognise just how overstretched they are and undervalued. And these are people, junior doctors can be people that are really quite senior, have worked in the health service for quite a long time,
And isn't that
and they just don't feel valued.
Isn't that the point, that junior doctors are already quite stretched during the week? Your plan, without adding to their numbers, is to spread them more evenly over 7 days to provide more cover at the weekend. By definition, that means they become even more stretched during the week.
Well, no, the part of the negotiations, part of this new contract is to have a lower limit on the number of hours overtime worked, so we increase safety for those doctors. That's one of the issues that's part of the dispute, because those extra hours that doctors were working was generating income, and that's the issue that's been part of this dispute.
But they say that they're already stretched on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And now you're saying, but they won't have to work so many hours then, but they will be working more hours at the weekend to give us the 7-day service. But if they're already stretched Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you're not adding any more doctors, it surely means that they're even more stretched during the week if you're going to spread the same number out over 7 days. That is just logical, isn't it?
Well, it depends how many doctors we have. The NHS has been employing more doctors, 5,000 more doctors since we came into office in 2010.
Yeah.
There's more billions going into the health service over the next Parliament as well, which is something, by the way, you can only do with a strong economy.
How many more
Kerry's
junior
just
doctors
given another spending commitment today.
How many
that's
more
unfunded.
junior doctors are you adding in this? Because my understanding is you're not.
Well, that will depend on the funding is there for the health service. We've increased the number of doctors and nurses since 2010. And again, you have to have the wealth to generate that. But this is about a 7-day-a-week safer health service.
And you can't promise that unless you've got the funds to deliver it.
Well, you have a strong economy, which we have. We can get the funds.
And now
we
we're
won't
hearing
have
that
the funds
doctors saying that if this contract is imposed on them, 90% have said that they would walk away.
Is there a chance you will impose this contract?
Yes, they've said that. We have to reach an agreement.
Isn't that going to be the mother of all fights?
This is no way to conduct negotiations. We should not be having trade unions of a professional body negotiating in this way, going on strike. It's simply an irresponsible way. 3,000 operations having to be cancelled because of this action. And I think that's not a way to handle these things.
The thing is, there are problems of morale and difficulty with recruiting new staff, not just in the health service, but also in teaching. And you will have seen, obviously, the report by the NAO saying that the government's missed its recruitment targets for 4 years. Why?
Well, what the report also says is that despite the challenge of increasing pupil numbers, despite the challenge of a strong economy, and therefore...
Some people would say it's a crisis, Nick,
well, it's
not a challenge.
Well, they said despite those challenges of a very tight and increasingly competitive graduate recruitment market, there are more teachers now in teaching than ever before. The pupil-teacher ratio has remained stable, and more people are joining teaching, coming into teaching, than are leaving.
Well, you say that, but let's look at the other statistics that the NAO actually put forward, and they're saying the number of vacancies has increased by a third. Indicators, they say, suggest teacher shortages are growing. Between 2011 and 2014, the recorded rate of vacancies more than doubled from 0.5% of the teaching workforce to 1.2%, and it's increasing. The number of teachers leaving the profession has gone up by 11% over 3 years. You say it's a challenge and there are more teachers. It's a crisis, which the NAO, and it's quite rare for them to use such strong wording, is saying they can't even approve the Department of Education's value for money objectives because of the statistics I've just read out to you.
Yes, but all those statistics are, you talk about an 11% increase. That amounts to 3,000 more teachers a year leaving out of a population of 500,000 teachers.
But it's going in the wrong direction,
well,
isn't it?
No, that is a consequence of a very strong economy with increasing opportunities for graduates. And we're addressing all these challenges by having very generous new bursaries to encourage more physics and maths and language graduates to come into teaching.
But they are actually saying that there are problems there across all secondary subjects, and the stem cell subjects particularly. 14 out of 17 had unfulfilled training places, and this is getting worse at secondary level compared with just 2 subjects 5 years ago. All the statistics are going the wrong way, whatever the challenges you put. And I say to you, it's because of a freeze on public sector pay being one of the key indicators.
No, there are more. No, there are. That we have the highest number of teachers in our history in our classrooms today. More people coming into teaching.
So why have you got more vacancies? Why have you got more people leaving?
There are more returners coming into because of the challenge of a strong economy. There are lots of opportunities now for physics graduates, for maths graduates, for foreign language graduates.
It's not an attractive profession anymore, is it? Partly because of the pay freeze.
That's not true. If it were true, we wouldn't see more people joining teaching than leaving, and increasing numbers of returners coming into the teaching. But it is a challenge of a strong economy, and we are addressing that challenge by having very generous bursaries. We've expanded charities like Teach First, which go out to universities to recruit the best graduates. What we want, actually, is for everybody to be helping us to encourage people to come into teaching, not spreading a negative message, which is what we hear from Lucy Powell, the Shadow Education Secretary.
This is the National Audit Office.
No, they're pointing out some clear facts, but they also point out that despite all those challenges, more people are coming into teaching than leaving. So, yes, there are challenges. It's a challenge of a strong economy, something, incidentally, we probably wouldn't have if we had a Labour government, but we are taking measures to encourage more top graduates to come into teaching, and they are doing so. In fact, this year's figures showed 2,000 more undergraduates coming into teaching than last year.
Thank you.
Now, the General Secretary of the TUC will deliver a petition today signed by 200,000 people in opposition to the government's trade union bill. It's a bill that's been debated in the Lords this afternoon, where it's facing considerable opposition. It's among a number of controversial measures the government's taking to change the way politics in Britain is done. Joko, as always, is across the details.
Well, it's a rough old game, politics, Andrew, and the government is changing the rules. One big reform is the way unions fund the Labour Party. At the moment, union members are given the option to opt out of paying into their political fund. The government believes this is unfair and instead argues union members should actively opt in. What's more, George Osborne has also announced short money, which is given to all political parties to allow them to carry out their parliamentary work. That would be reduced by 19%. Labour are crying foul and claim the moves could cost them up to £8 million a year. It's not only Labour who are taking a mauling. The charity sector is angry over proposals which would mean charities would no longer be able to spend central government grants on lobbying Parliament. The government argues taxpayers' money should only be spent on helping people. However, the National Council for Voluntary Organisations call it an insane policy. It's not just about money. The government has reformed voter registration. Now everyone must register individually instead of by household. And Labour argue that the changes are happening too quickly and many people will slip through the cracks. Andrew.
Thanks, Joko. Nick, many people have often thought that two big weaknesses of our party funding system is Labour's overdependence on the unions and your overdependence on rich hedge fund people and private equity and Russian oligarchs. Why have you only decided to deal with the union side and not with your own way of funding?
Well, each of those issues are right in their own right. It's important that you don't just have your money taken from your salary to pay into a party coffers, that you have to actively opt in. If you try to say you have to opt out of an insurance policy when you buy a television set, there'd be uproar. And the same principle applies to joining a trade union. The levy, you should have to opt in to pay the levy, not have to actively opt out to pay.
But it's been the policy of every previous Conservative government since the 1920s to allow an opt-out rather than an opt-in. What changed?
Well, it's wrong in principle, and we're doing what is
So every
right.
government, so the Winston Churchill government, the Macmillan government, even the Thatcher government, were wrong in principle
Well, there are all
to
kinds of things
allow
happen.
an opt-in rather than an
And
opt-out
in the-
rather than an opt-in.
Well, in those past governments you mentioned, the closed shop was lawful. And you know, I've always
Mrs.
thought
Thatcher
it very
abolished the closed shop, but she did not abolish
but it was
the
there.
opt-out procedure.
And she should have done, as Winston Churchill should have got rid of the closed shop.
Well, supposing you're right on that, and we'll come back and get your reaction to that in a minute, but supposing you were right, why would you also not deal with the fact that unregulated hedge fund managers, unregulated private equity, people who may not even reside here very much, like Russian oligarchs or whatever, can donate unlimited sums of money to the Conservatives? Unlimited.
They can also give unlimited sums to other political parties, the Liberal Party, the Labour
Why
Party.
would it be?
And they do.
Well, why
But every
should there
donation-
not be a limit on
Well, there is a limit.
donations?
There is a limit on it. If you anything over £5,000 has to be declared.
Right.
In a free society, you have to allow people to use their money to make their political case. So long as it's transparent and so long as it's declared. We tried to have party discussions, all party discussions in the last Parliament to try to resolve this party funding overall, and it collapsed. And the alternative, of course, is to have taxpayer-funded and that's not something that the public wants.
Most trade union members do not vote Labour. The majority don't. So why shouldn't there be the principle that if you join a trade union, you are then asked, do you also want to contribute to the Labour Party? And if you do, you tick a box, rather than it being automatically taken without you getting the chance.
It's contributing to the trade union's political fund,
Yeah.
which they would then use to make donations to the Labour Party,
Right.
but also to campaign on a range of issues. We had the Collins Review, named after our previous General Secretary, Ray Collins, that was looking at issues like that, and we were looking at moving perhaps to some reforms of the way the party is funded by the unions. The problem with what the government is doing now, as you said in your opening question to Nick, is it's entirely one-sided. This is an attack on the trade unions' relationship with Labour. We're also seeing an attack on the way that charities are engaged in
I take the
political
point that it's
campaigning.
one-sided, which is the
It's not
question I put
looking-
to
and in the
Mr.
past,
Gibb.
it's
But
always
what
been
I'm
dealt with by
asking you about the
consensus.
principle, even if it's one-sided, it doesn't necessarily make it wrong. They could be wrong that they're not trying to clean up both sides. That was the the implication behind my question. But what is wrong with the principle, given that most trade union members are not Labour voters, that if they want their fees, a chunk of their fees to go to the Labour Party, that should be an explicit act rather than something that just happens?
Well, as I said, with the Collins Review, we were looking at
Yeah.
perhaps bringing that in over a number of years.
So
What
you
this-
don't. So you kind of concede
So
the
in
principle.
principle, I think that's something that we, are ready to look at. But what this government is doing with the bill now is it would be, I think, a 3-month period after the legislation comes
Which
in.
is not very long.
Which is not very long in terms of it's a huge logistical effort. There's also issues about not allowing electronic ballots and not allowing this to be done online. So just the sheer cost to the trade unions of having to operate this.
But let me just put this too. We've just seen Bernie Sanders win an amazing victory in New Hampshire, won by 2-1 over Hillary Clinton, and she runs the most formidable political machine in America. And there's a lot of Wall Street money in the Clinton machine, and some union money as well. Mr. Saunders managed to get over 3 million individual donations, $20 million in January alone. Not big money. Most of it, I had them last night at about 2:30 in the morning. Most of the donations under $100.
Yeah.
Why can't Labour and Conservative do that in this
And I
country?
think that's something that Labour wanted to move towards. And
There's nothing stopping you.
yeah, well, we've now got, I think, more than 370,000 members, which
Yeah, but
is
some of
nearly
them are
double
only given
what they were at the
£3.
general election. Well, it was £3 to join, but that doesn't mean to say they're not then making donations.
But you don't get
But
that kind of
I think we do
individual
want to
money.
move away from the
Why-
big donations dominating
Yeah,
politics, but it's
but you're
far
not.
more an issue. The Conservatives had their black and white ball the other
Indeed.
night, where you had people
Held
paying
it.
huge amounts of money.
Well, actually, this year it wasn't
actually, this
compared
year
to
it wasn't as
previous
good, yeah,
years.
so-
It wasn't so much, but I take your point.
You do have people that, as you
Well-
say, sometimes don't even have much of a connection with politics in the UK, paying a lot of money, and we're not able to do that in the Labour Party.
Okay.
We're funded by ordinary people, whether it's through the trade unions or through our membership.
Let me just put this final point to you, Mr. Gibb. we've got this, what many people regarded as they're not necessarily against what you're doing with the unions, but they see it as kind of one-sided. You're hitting Labour's sources rather than doing anything about your own. You're now putting tougher rules in for charities at what they can do with government money. You're changing voter registration. That may be right or wrong, but it certainly is more of a help to you than it is to Labour. You add it all up, kind of looks like the arrogance of power.
No, each of those issues is right in its own right. We had the problems in Tower Hamlets with voter fraud. The election court was very, condemning the use of sort of ghost voters. We're tackling ghost voters.
But all these changes are to your advantage.
No, what we want is an electoral register that has integrity. And they've had this system in Northern Ireland since 2002, and it's worked perfectly well. In terms of charities lobbying, when people give money to charity or charities use public money that we pay to provide services, we don't expect that money then to be used for political
But charities
lobbying.
aren't there just to provide services. They're there to, if they feel that the law is penalising the people that they're there to help.
And also
I think it's entirely right for them to lobby on those
publicity
issues.
on particular issues.
Exactly.
But anyway,
and the government, I think the attack on charities in some ways is even more important than what they're doing on the trade
We want that
union
money
front.
spent on vulnerable people and the services they're meant to be providing.
We'll need to come back because we're up against PMQs, I think. Is it Wednesday? Yes, it is. Have you been cheating?
No.
Of course not. Every week we give you a chance to get hold of a coveted Daily Politics mug. All we ask is that you carefully watch a beautifully crafted, award-winning piece of film containing music and archive from a particular year, and then guess which year they're from. But rather than relying on your own knowledge, which in some cases may not be substantial, some of you, we think, are using the internet, or the World Wide Web sphere, as Gordon Brown used to call it. Now, this may help you get a hold of a mug, but as our guest of the day, Schools Minister Nick Gibb has said, and I quote, "It is mistaken to believe you can outsource your memory to Google and still expect to think well."
Well,
You should speak to the researchers on this programme.
I was going to say, how are we going to survive?
Exactly.
Consider yourselves told. And now, with or without the assistance of Google, other search engines are available. Can you tell us
I
when
think
this
which ones?
happened?
All dressed up and nowhere to go.
Your party's long history of anti-Semitism, homophobia, attacks on them. Why don't you apologise, you gutless coward?
Bottles in the ice, like a blizzard. When we drink, we do it right. Getting slizzard, sipping scissor. Am I right? Like 3-6. Now I'm feeling so fly, like a G6.
Good to see people enjoying themselves. To be in with a chance of winning a Daily Politics mug, send your answer to our special quiz email address. That's dpquiz@bbc.co.uk. Entries must arrive by 12:30 today. And you can see the full terms and conditions for Guess the Year on our website. That's bbc.co.uk/Daily Politics. All done without Googling it.
I recommend you read them if you have trouble getting to sleep. It's coming up to midday here. Just look at Big Ben. There's Big Ben, and you can mean one thing with that. Prime Minister's questions. It also means Laura Kunsberg has joined us. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
What's buzzing this morning? What's happening? What's going on?
Well, I think there's huge amounts of attention on junior doctor strike, of course, because there are thousands of doctors not going to work today around the country. Big standoff between the BMA and Jeremy Hunt, the Secretary of State for Health, and no sign of resolution on the horizon. However, I think, again, Jeremy Corbyn is going to choose, I expect, not to talk about that. Of course, the last doctor strike, we sat and thought, surely he'll raise it. He didn't. He raised something else instead. And I think today he may return to one of his favourite issues about housing, particularly a concern on the government's policy of what's known as pay to stay, where council tenants who start to earn better, 30,000 a year for a household, outside London, 40,000 a year per household. Inside London, have to start paying market rent on council properties. And we know this is an issue that's very, very dear to Jeremy Corbyn's heart, the provision of council housing for
Does it
people who
affect,
want
do
it.
we know if it affects a lot of people?
Well, there was a report at the weekend, which is why I think he might raise it today. Of course, could be wrong. But a report at the weekend suggested that 60,000 people might have to move. They wouldn't be able to afford to stay in their homes. And I think that might propel it into Prime Minister's
Well, that
questions
they
today.
couldn't afford the higher
They couldn't
rent.
afford to pay the market rent because they were earning more, but the jump between social rent and a market rent would be higher than the comparative jump in their salaries. Of course, as ever with statistics, we know sometimes PMQs descends into a sort of war of stats. As ever with statistics about the potential impacts of a policy, it's not that easy to be precise about what the impact would be. I wouldn't also be surprised if there might not be maybe a rather cheeky question in there, as Jeremy Corbyn likes to use questions from the public, from Mary Cameron from Oxfordshire.
Now, just briefly explain why Mary Cameron...
Indeed.
The clues in the surname, I would think.
Who likes being told off by their mum, not least the Prime Minister, not least publicly. But David Cameron's mum and his aunt Claire have both got involved in a campaign in Oxfordshire to stop cuts to children's services. Now, of course, this is a raw nerve for David Cameron, not just because of that particular issue, but also because his local council leader made public a letter that he wrote to him after David Cameron had been complaining about local cuts. So I think that if Jeremy Corbyn maybe has got a sense of humour, it's quite an entertaining way of raising what is a really big issue for lots of people around the country, and an embarrassing one for David Cameron at that.
And he doesn't go on what's been something of a problem for the Prime Minister in the past 72 hours, which is the various stances he's taken on Europe.
Well, indeed.
Is that because Mr Corbyn's kind of uncomfortable with Europe?
Well, look, I think there are lots of reports this morning and conversations with people who are in the shadow cabinet. Maybe I'm sure Kerry would have a view on this, that there's just a nervousness about how full throttle Jeremy Corbyn is going to be in his support for staying in the European Union in the campaign to come.
Well, I saw a report this morning that he wasn't planning to take part in no major Remain rally.
That's certainly something that has been suggested, and it was put to me yesterday. That,
We'll come back to that, Laura, because
it's very
interesting
important.
subject. But let's, for the moment, go to Prime Minister's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the whole House has been deeply saddened by the death of Harry Harpham last week from cancer. After a distinguished career as a miner, an advisor to David Blunkett and a Sheffield councillor, he was returned to this place last May, succeeding David Blunkett himself. While he was only in this place a short time, he quickly became a popular MP, recognised for his commitment to his constituents and his beliefs. It's a measure of the man that he continued to carry out his work as an MP throughout his treatment. We offer his wife Jill and his 5 children our profound condolences. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mims Davis.
Firstly, may I associate myself alongside colleagues with the sentiments expressed at the sad loss of the member for Sheffield and Brightside and Hillsborough. He came to this House with an excellent record in local government and will be greatly missed. I'm sure the whole House send our condolence to his family at this sad time. Housing is the #1 issue in my constituency. Queries on a workable local plan, looking after our green spaces while strongly offering that pure conservative value of the right to buy. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that our Help to Buy ISAs, one currently being taken out every 30 seconds, are the right way to promote both savings and encourage home ownership?
Well, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. One of the most difficult things for young people is to get that deposit together for their first flat or their first house, and that's where these Help to Buy ISAs, where we match some of the money they put in, can make such a difference. And it is right to note that 250,000 first-time buyers have opened a Help to Buy ISA. So what we've seen under this government is 40,000 people exercise the right to buy their council house. Now we're extending that to all housing association tenants, and we've seen 130,000 people with Help to Buy getting the first flat or the first house. There's more to do, mostly building houses, but helping people with their deposits is absolutely vital for our country.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister and the member for Eastleigh in paying tribute to Harry Harpham. The honourable member for Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough, a former miner who passed away last week. Just a short time ago, Harry used his last question here to ask the Prime Minister questions about the Sheffield Forge Masters and the steel industry. I hope the Prime Minister will reflect on his diligence in representing that industry and his constituency. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I had a chance to have a very nice conversation with Harry's widow, Jill, and his family, and I asked them to say, how would they like to remember Harry? And she gave me this message, which I'll read out. We've admired the bravery and courage he showed in his life, which was formed during the miners' strike and carried him forward for the rest of his life. I'm sure the whole House and many in the much wider community will remember Harry as a decent, honourable man, absolutely dedicated to his community and his constituents, and we're very sad at his passing. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, also following the member for Eastleigh, I have a question on housing. I've got an email from Rosie. She's in her 20s. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the Rosie who's written to me doesn't have the same good housing that the Chief Whip of our party does. But aspiration springs eternal. The Rosie who's written to me is in her 20s, and she says, I work incredibly hard at my job, yet I'm still having to live at home with my parents. The lack of housing options, Mr. Speaker, are forcing her to consider moving, even leaving the country. She asked the Prime Minister what action he's going to take to help young people and families suffering from unrealistic house prices and uncapped rents to get somewhere safe and secure to live.
Well, first of all, let me say to the right honourable gentleman, when you get a letter from the Chief Whip, that normally spells trouble. But what I would say to Rosie, the Rosie who wrote to him, is we want to do everything we can to help young people get on the housing ladder. That's why we've got these help to save ISAs, and I hope she's looking at that. We're cutting Rosie's taxes, so this year she'll be able to earn £11,000 before she starts paying any taxes. If Rosie is a tenant in a housing association home, she'll be able to buy that home because we're introducing and extending the right to buy. And of course, with Help to Buy, she will have the opportunity to register for Help to Buy, which gives people the chance to have a smaller deposit on owning their own home. Now, if Rosie is not earning that much money but wants to be a homeowner, shared ownership can make a real difference. And in some parts of the country, you'll only need a deposit of some £1,000 or £2,000 to begin the process of becoming a homeowner. But I recognise in this Parliament, building more houses, following those schemes, we've got to deliver for Rosie.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister wants to help deliver decent housing for Rosie. She lives and works in London, and as the Prime Minister knows, London is very, very expensive. He talks about people getting on the housing ladder, but the reality is that home ownership has fallen under his government by 200,000. It actually rose by 1 million under the last Labour government. His record is one of actually some years of failure on housing. He said that council homes sold under right to buy would be replaced like for like. Can the Prime Minister tell us how that policy is panning out?
First of all, let me start with what happened under Labour with right-to-buy sales. Because what happened was, one council home was built for every 170 council homes they sold. That is the record. Now, we have said that we will make sure that 2 homes are built for every council home in London that is sold. That is because my honourable friend, the member for Richmond Park, insisted on that in an amendment to the housing bill. Now, these take some years to build, but the money that they will be built, or the money comes back to the Treasury.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister ought to be aware that just one home has been built for every 8 that have been sold under his government. People are increasingly finding it very difficult to find anywhere to live. The Chancellor's crude cuts in housing benefits for those in supported housing are putting at risk hundreds of thousands of elderly people, people with mental health conditions, war veterans and women fleeing domestic violence who need support. Can the Prime Minister tell the House what estimate housing providers have made in terms of the impact of this policy on supported housing?
First of all, we are going to increase housing supply in the social sector by an £8 billion housing budget during this Parliament that's going to build 400,000 affordable homes. Now, when it comes to our reforms of housing benefit, yes, we have cut housing benefit because it was completely out of control when we came to government. There were families in London who were getting £100,000 of housing benefit per family. Think how many people, think how many Roses were going to work, working hard every day, just to provide that housing benefit for one family. Now, we support supported housing schemes, and we'll look very carefully to make sure they can work well in the future, but I make no apology for the fact that in this Parliament we are cutting social rents. So Roses who are living in social houses, going out to work, will have lower rents under this government.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased the Prime Minister finally got onto the question of supported housing. Housing providers estimate that nearly half of all supported housing schemes will close. 1 in 4 providers is set to close all of their provision. This is a very serious crisis. I assume the Prime Minister is not content to see the elderly, people with mental health conditions and others with nowhere to live. So can he assure the House now that the warm words he's just given on supported housing will be matched by action, and he will stop this cut which will destroy the supported housing sector?
We will continue to support the supported housing sector, and the report that he quotes from was an opinion poll with an extremely leading question, if he actually looks at what it was he was looking at. But the changes that we're making, reducing social rents by 1% every year for 4 years, that is good news for people who go out to work, who work hard, who'd like to pay less rent. And that goes with the lower taxes that they'll be paying and the more childcare they'll be getting. The other change that we're making, which doesn't come into force actually till 2018, is to make sure that we're not paying housing benefit to social tenants way above what we would pay to private sector tenants. Because the simple point is this, and this is where I think Labour have got to focus: every penny you spend on housing subsidy is money you can't spend on building houses. So let's take this back. Let's take this right back to Rosie in the beginning. She wants a country where we build homes. She wants a country where you can buy a home. She wants a country with a strong economy so you can afford to buy a home. All of those things we're delivering. And you won't deliver them if you go on spending more and more money on subsidised housing and housing benefit. One day Labour's got to realise the welfare bills have to be brought under control.
Mr. Speaker, Shelter estimates that the measures in the housing bill will lose 180,000 affordable homes over the next 4 years. The Prime Minister is actually overseeing a very damaging housing crisis. It's pricing out people from buying. It's not providing enough social housing. Therefore, many people are forced to rely on the private rented sector. The benches behind him recently voted against an amendment put forward by my honourable friend for homes to be fit for human habitation. Labour invested £22 billion in government in bringing social homes up to decent home standard. There are now 11 million people in this country who are private renters. Does the Prime Minister know how many of those homes don't meet the decent home standard?
To listen to Labour when in the last 5 years we built more council houses than they built in 13 years. Where was he? Where was he when that was going on? 13 years and an absolutely hopeless record on housing. What we're doing is an £8 billion housing budget that will provide 400,000 new affordable homes, a target to build 1 million homes during this Parliament, getting housing benefit down so we can spend money on housing, and having a strong economy that can support the housing we need.
Mr. Speaker, I was asking through you, the Prime Minister, how many of the 11 million renters are living in homes that do not meet the decent home standard and therefore substandard. I'll help him. 1/3 of those in the private rented sector don't meet decent home standards. Shelter found that 6 out of 10 renters have issues such as damp, mould, leaking roofs and windows. It's simply not good enough. Millions are struggling to get the home they deserve. More families slipping into temporary accommodation, elderly threatened with eviction, homelessness rising, too few homes being built, social housing under pressure, families forced into low-standard, overpriced private rented sector, young people unable to move out of the family home and start their own lives. When is the Prime Minister going to realise there is a housing crisis in Britain? His government needs to address it now so that we do not continue with this dreadful situation in this country.
Well, let me just take one of the figures that he mentions about homelessness. Homelessness is less than half the peak today that it was under the last Labour government. There's a simple point here. You can only invest in new houses. You can only restore existing houses. You can only build new houses. You can only support people into those houses if you've got a strong economy. Now, we inherited mass unemployment, an economy that had completely collapsed, a banking crisis, and now we've got zero inflation, wages growing, unemployment at 5%, an economy growing, and people able, for the first time, to look to their future and see they can buy and own a house in our country.
Mr. Speaker, Nadia Murad was a 19-year-old Yazidi woman when Daesh came to her village. They killed most of her family, they tortured her, they raped her, and they made her their slave. Mr. Speaker, Nadia's story is the same as thousands of Yazidi women, except thousands of Yazidi women are still held in captivity, and Nadia managed to escape. And in fact, Nadia is in the public gallery today. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister join me in acknowledging Nadia's resilience, her bravery, the essential qualities that have allowed her to triumph over Daesh? And will he do everything in his power to redouble his efforts to support Yazidi women and to eradicate Daesh?
Let me thank my honourable friend for raising this issue and the way in which he's done so, and let me welcome Nadia Murad, who's here with us today. She and the Yazidi community have suffered appallingly at the hands of this murderous, brutal, fascist organisation in Syria and in Iraq. And we must do everything we can to defeat Daesh and its violent ideology. Now, we're playing a leading role in this global coalition, and in terms of Iraq, where so many Yazidis suffered, Daesh has lost over 40% of the territory it once controlled, and so we are making progress. But as I said at the time of the debate about Syria, this is going to take a long time. Building up Iraqi security forces, working with Syrian opposition forces, building the capacity of governments in both countries to drive this evil organisation out of the Middle East. But however long it takes, we must stick at it.
Angus Robertson.
Thank you. We in these benches join in the condolences of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in relation to Harry Harpham, and pass on our best wishes to his family at this sad and difficult time. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister made a vow and his party signed an agreement that there would be no detriment to Scotland with new devolution arrangements. Why is the UK Treasury proposing plans that may be detrimental towards Scotland to the tune of £3 billion?
Well, first of all, we accept the Smith principles of no detriment, and there are two principles. First of all, no detriment to Scotland, quite rightly, at the time when this transfer is made, in terms of Scotland having these new tax-raising powers, and then no detriment to Scottish taxpayers, but also to the rest of the United Kingdom taxpayers, who we have to bear in mind as we take into account this very important negotiation. Now, I've had good conversations relations with the First Minister. Negotiations are underway. I want us to successfully complete this very important piece of devolution in a fair and reasonable way, and these negotiations should continue. But let me remind the right honourable gentleman, if we had had full fiscal devolution, with oil revenues having collapsed by 94%, the right honourable gentleman and his party would be just weeks away from a financial calamity for Scotland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the context of referendums, whether in Scotland or across the UK on EU membership, don't voters have a right to know that what is promised by the UK government can be trusted and will be delivered in full? So will the Prime Minister tell the Treasury that time is running out on delivering a fair fiscal framework and that they must agree a deal that is fair both to the people of Scotland and fair to the rest of the United Kingdom?
I can tell him everything that has been committed to by this government will be delivered. We committed to this huge act of devolution to Scotland, and we've delivered it. We committed to the Scotland Bill. We're well on the way to delivering it. All the things we said we would, including those vital Smith principles. But there's an ongoing negotiation to reach a fair settlement, and I would say to the Scottish First Minister and the Scottish Finance Minister, they have to recognise there must be fairness across the rest of the United Kingdom too. But with goodwill, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, no one is keener on agreement than me. I want the Scottish National Party, here and in Holyrood, to have to start making decisions. Which taxes are you going to raise? What are you going to do with benefits? I want to get rid of, frankly, this grievance agenda and let you get on with a governing agenda, and then we can see what you're made of.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The skills shortage in engineering in Wiltshire is particularly a problem. It is threatening and undermining all the work that we have done in job creation and also supporting businesses. It is, quite simply, a ticking time bomb. Mr. Speaker, may I ask the Prime Minister, what more can he do to remove the stigma, misunderstanding and all the problems associated around STEM subjects and STEM careers?
Well, I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this. There are special circumstances in Wiltshire because, of course, you've got the enormous success of Dyson, which is hiring engineers and skilled mathematicians and scientists from every university in the country, and long may that continue. What we will do is help by training 3 million apprentices in this Parliament. We're giving special help to teachers of STEM subjects and encouraging them into teaching. But I think there's a lot that business and industry can do to help us in this by going into schools and talking about what these modern engineering careers are all about. How much fulfilment people can get from these careers to encourage people to change the culture when it comes to pursuing these careers.
Louise Ellman.
Mr. Speaker, young people afraid of losing their homes, women denied the pensions that they were expecting, and increasingly the needy left exposed without the social care they need to live a decent life. When will the Prime Minister address these scandals?
What we are doing for pensioners is putting in place the triple lock so that every pensioner knows there can never be another shameful 75 pence increase in the pension that we saw under Labour. They know that every year it will either be wages, prices or 2.5%, and that's why the pension is so much higher than when I became Prime Minister. But of course we need to make sure there's a fair settlement for local government too, and we'll be hearing more about that later today. But this ability of local councils to raise special council tax for social care will help an area where there is great pressure.
Nigel Adams.
The Spitfire was a crucial element in our winning the Battle of Britain 75 years ago. And keeping our country free from tyranny. However, there are some who fear that our independent nuclear deterrent could be as obsolete as the Spitfire. Now, could my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, assure the House and the country that this is not the case?
It takes quite a talent in a Shadow Defence Secretary to insult Spitfire pilots and our brave submariners all in one go. Another week another completely ludicrous Labour position on defence. I think the last word should go to the Honourable Member for Bridgend, and thank you, Twitter, for this one, who, as she came out of the PLP meeting, tweeted this: "Oh dear, oh my God, oh dear, need to go to rest in a darkened room." I expect she'll find the rest of her party will be there with her.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At today's Biz Select Committee, the Business Secretary confirmed that the government won't support the EU Commission in raising tariffs on dumped steel from countries like China. Why won't the UK government stand up for UK steel?
We have repeatedly stood up for UK steel, including supporting taking anti-dumping measures in the EU, but that's not enough. We also need to get behind public procurement for steel, and that's what we're doing. We need to get behind reducing energy bills for steel, and that's what we're doing. We need to support communities like his own that have seen job losses, and that's exactly what we're doing. We recognise what a vital part of Britain's industrial base the steel industry is, and that's why we're backing it.
Victoria Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Julian Assange is accused of rape and is on the run. Despite this, a United Nations panel nobody has ever heard of declared last week that he has been arbitrarily detained and somehow deserving of compensation. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this was a nonsensical decision, that Mr. Assange should hand himself over to the Swedish prosecutors, and that if anyone is deserving of compensation, it is the British taxpayer who has had to pay £12 million to police his Ecuadorian hideout?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. I think this was a ridiculous decision. You've got a man here with an outstanding allegation of rape against him. He barricaded himself into the Ecuadorian embassy and yet claims he was arbitrarily detained. The only person who detained himself was himself. And so what he should do is come out of that embassy and face the arrest warrant that is against him. He's being asked to stand trial in Sweden, a country with a fair reputation for justice, and he should bring to the end this whole sorry saga.
Mike Weir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Women's age groups, including my own and Angus, have raised serious concerns that changes in housing benefit may force the closure of many refuges. Will the Prime Minister undertake to specifically exclude refuges from these changes and protect this vital service for vulnerable women and children?
I said in answers to questions from the Leader of the Opposition, we want to support supported housing projects that work in many of our constituencies, and we've all seen how important they are. These changes we're talking about housing benefit don't actually come into place until 2018, so there's plenty of time to make sure that we support supported housing projects.
Stuart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next month, Milton Keynes will host the first ever National Apprenticeship Fair. We have a strong record in expanding apprenticeships, but is there not still a need for a cultural shift in careers advice to show that high-level apprenticeships are equally valid to university places?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right that the careers advice we need to give young people is that there's a choice for every school leaver, we hope, of either a university place, because we've uncapped university places, or an apprenticeship, because we're funding 3 million of them in this Parliament. And we need to go on to explain that if you become an apprentice, that doesn't rule out doing a degree or a degree-level qualification later on during your apprenticeship. The option of earning and learning is stronger in Britain today than it's ever been before.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree that how we protect human rights in the legal systems of the United Kingdom deserves full and careful consideration? And will he give an assurance that his consultation on the repeal of the Human Rights Act will not conflict with the pre-election purdah periods in Scotland and the other devolved administrations?
Well, we will look very carefully at all of these issues, but I would say to the Honourable Lady and to honourable members opposite, the idea that there were no human rights in Britain before the Human Rights Act is an absolutely ludicrous notion. This House has been a great bastion and defender of human rights, but we'll look very carefully at the timing of any of the announcements that we make.
Should Andrew?
Mr. Speaker, I spent most of my working life in children's hospices who rely heavily on donations from organisations like Children in Need, who have a long and proud association with the town of Pudsey. Last week, Children in Need's most famous celebrity sadly passed away. Would my right honourable friend join me and the people of Pudsey in paying tribute to Sir Terry Wogan, who did so much to inspire millions of pounds to be donated to these causes?
I'm certainly very happy to do that, and the honourable member representing his constituency, where Pudsey has such a connection with Children in Need, is absolutely right to raise this. I think Terry Wogan was one of the great icons of this country. I think, like many people in this House, you sort of felt almost you grew up with him, listening to him on the radio, in the car, or presenting Blankety Blank, or all the many other things he did. Perhaps many people's favourite was the Eurovision Song Contest, which every year he brought such great humour to. You didn't have to be a tog to be an enormous fan. I think we were all fans, and he'll be hugely missed, and his work with Children in Need was particularly special.
John Nicholson.
Mr. Speaker, sir, on Monday I attended the Work and Pensions Tribunal appeal hearing for my constituent, Mrs. Jackie Millen, a brave, inspiring woman who has dwarfism. Despite being unable to climb staircases except on all fours, she was awarded 0 disability points by her assessor. Can I ask the Prime Minister whether he has, as a constituency MP, himself attended any tribunal hearings, and if so, whether he found the process fair, dignified and compassionate?
Well, I'm very happy to look into the specific case that he raises. As a constituency MP, of course I have people coming to my surgery with inquiries either about employment and support allowance or indeed about disability living allowance. And also I've got the experience, having had a disabled son, of filling out all the forms myself and looking forward to the new system, which I think with a proper medical check will work out better. So I have listened to these arguments, but we have to have a system of adjudication that is independent of politicians.
And a Milling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Growing up nearby, I always knew that I was nearly home when I saw the iconic cooling towers of the Rugeley power stations on the horizon. On Monday, the owners of the remaining power station announced its likely closure this summer. Will my right honourable friend ask the Secretary of State to meet with me and discuss further the government support that can be provided to the 150 workers and the provisions that can be made to ensure the site is redeveloped as quickly as possible?
I will certainly arrange for that meeting to take place, and we should thank everyone who's worked at power stations that then come to the end of their lives for the work that they've done to give us electricity, to keep the lights on, to keep our economy moving. But I think she's absolutely right. As coal-fired power stations come to the end of their lives, we must make sure that proper redevelopment takes place so we provide jobs for constituents like hers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Football Supporters Federation is considering calling on fans to hold mass walkouts in order to get their voices heard about the issue of ticket prices. Will the Prime Minister act to give fans a place at the table in club boardrooms in order that their voices can be heard when issues such as ticket prices are being discussed?
I will look very carefully at the suggestion the honourable gentleman makes, because I think there is a problem here where some teams and some clubs put up prices very rapidly every year, even though so much of the money for football actually comes through the sponsorship and the equipment and other sources. So I'll look very carefully at what he says.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
The vital debate and vote on the Trident successor submarine should have been held in the last Parliament, but was blocked by the Liberal Democrats. Given the fun that the Prime Minister had a few moments ago at the Labour Party's expense over Trident's successor, it must be tempting for him to put off the vote until Labour's conference in October. May I urge him, however, to do the statesmanlike thing and hold that vote as soon as possible, because everyone is ready for it and everyone is expecting it.
Well, what we should do is have the vote when we need to have the vote, and that's exactly what we will do. But no one should be in any doubt that this government is going to press ahead with all the decisions that are necessary to replace in full our Trident submarines. And I think the Labour Party should listen to Lord Hutton, who was their Defence Secretary for many years, and he says this: if Labour wants to retain any credibility on defence whatsoever, it had better recognise the abject futility of what its leadership is currently proposing. So I hope when that vote comes, we'll have support from right across this House of Commons.
Gareth Thomas!
In light of today's damning National Audit Office report on teacher shortages, will the Prime Minister now take urgent steps to help excellent schools such as those in my constituency recruit and crucially retain the best teachers, including by extending the so-called inner London waiting to all Harrow schools and indeed other suburban schools in London too?
Well, obviously we'll look carefully at this report. There are 13,100 more teachers in our schools than when I became Prime Minister. Our teachers are better qualified than ever before. And actually we've got, well, people are shouting out about increased pupil numbers, but they might be interested to know that we've got 47,500 fewer pupils in overcrowded schools than in 2010, because we put the investment in where it's needed. But where I agree with the honourable gentleman is we do need schemes like Teach First, like our National Leadership Programme, that are getting some of the best teachers into the schools where they're most needed.
Mitchell!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, deserves great credit for the results of the Syria Replenishment Conference, which was held under his co-authorship in London. But he will be aware that this can only address the symptoms of the catastrophe that is Syria today, and not the causes. Can he tell the House what more he thinks the British government can do to try and promote the political track and ensure that it reaches the most speedy possible success?
Well, first of all, can I thank my right honourable friend for what he says about the Syria conference, and it gives me the opportunity to thank my co-hosts, the Norwegians, the Germans, the Kuwaitis and the Secretary-General of the United Nations. We raised in one day more money than has ever been raised at one of these conferences ever in history, over $10 billion. And I want to pay tribute to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for DFID, who did a lot of the very hard work that was done. Now, this money helps because it will keep people in the region, it will feed people, clothe people, make sure they get the medicine that they need, but we do need this political solution. We go on working with all of our partners to deliver this, but it does require all countries, including Russia, to recognise the need for a moderate Sunni opposition to be at the table to create a transitional authority in Syria. Without that, I fear we'll end up with a situation where you have Assad in one corner and Daesh in the other corner. The worst possible outcome in terms of terrorism, the worst possible outcome in terms of refugees, and the worst possible outcome for the future of Syria.
Diana Johnson.
Thank you. I'm sure the Prime Minister's looking forward to visiting Hull next year. As the UK City of Culture, we're already backed by many prestigious organisations like the BBC and the RSC. But we could do much better to make this a real national celebration of culture. Will the Prime Minister join with me in urging the many London-based national arts organisations to actually do their bit and contribute to the success of Hull 2017?
I think the Honourable Lady makes a very important point, which is our national cultural institutions have immense amount of works and prestige that they can bring out to regional galleries and regional centres when there's a City of Culture event, or frankly, more broadly. And I do talk to them about that. I will be looking forward to visiting Hull. I know my honourable friends, as the City of Wilberforce, you'll all want to be joining me in the City of Hull. It's a city of poets. Andrew Marvell, home to Philip Larkin for many years, and of course Stevie Smith. And sometimes one might want to contemplate what it looks like, not waving but drowning.
Order. Before large numbers of honourable members file out of the chamber, I remind them that the election for the chair of the Environmental Audit Committee is now taking place in Committee Room 16. Voting will continue until 1:30 p.m. Also, voting on a deferred division is taking place in the No lobby. This will continue until 2 p.m. Order.
Well, we wanted to say with that little announcement there, it may not have meant much to you, it didn't mean much to me, but we didn't know if we was going to let someone else ask a question after that before they all streamed off for lunch or whatever it is they now do. As Laura accurately predicted, Mr Corbyn went on housing, raised a number of issues through his 6 questions, which were all on housing, and the Prime Minister's main response was to reel off a list of things that the government had done or was about to do on housing. We'll discuss a number of things in a moment, but first let's find out, Joko, what did our viewers make of it?
Well, it was all on housing and they responded in that way, but people felt Jeremy Corbyn needed to be tougher with the Prime Minister. John said, is Jeremy Corbyn the leader of the opposition or just the opposition housing minister? He needs to ask questions on other subjects. This from Herbie. Why does Jeremy Corbyn continue to let Cameron off the hook? Surely he should be addressing the doctors' strike. He should be loudly challenging Cameron on every point, not adopting lacklustre ramblings. But Robert Fox says, well done, Jezza, clear winner, a bit of venom for a change, Cameron rant as usual. Edward Buxton, though, a poor performance from Jeremy Corbyn, a gentle, methodical approach simply doesn't work at PMQs. For most voters, it's the only time they ever see Parliament in play, and they see David Cameron easily swatting away Jeremy Corbyn's questions. Martin McHugh, I haven't done the sums here, but Mr Cameron claims he can build 400,000 homes for $8 billion. That's only 20,000 each. Bargain. Helen Manning says poor Rosie chose the wrong champion in Jeremy Corbyn. His argument got wiped out by the Prime Minister. Too much money paid in benefits equals no house for Rosie ever. And Mark Egan says Cameron needs to come down from his ivory tower and have a walk around the West End of London at night. I've never seen so many people sleeping rough on the streets.
OK, thank you for that. Well, the Mother of Parliaments was in an interesting mode today. It failed to raise a single question about the big domestic story of the day, the doctor's strike. Not one question on that. And then on this incredible, in a very bad sense, developing humanitarian crisis north of Aleppo on the Turkish border, where up to 70,000 refugees now seem to be heading that way. The combined forces of Assad, Hezbollah and Mr Putin now destroying what Mr Cameron there was talking about, the moderate factions in Syria. The myopic insularity of the House of Commons sometimes beggars belief, I would suggest.
Well, I mean, I think if we spin back sort of 10 days ago, you certainly did find British politicians sounding cautious but cautiously hopeful about the peace process, so-called, that seemed to be getting off at the ground in Geneva. And of course, the Foreign Secretary has been very involved in the shuttle diplomacy and around trying to get people around the table in that. And of course, not so long ago, we spent hours in this studio talking about whether or not the government would get enough votes to back expanding airstrikes into Syria. That was a huge issue just sort of 10, 12 weeks ago in this square mile. But here, this sort of crisis has gone through into a completely, not a completely new phase, but a decisively very different phase. And yet, nothing in the House of Commons.
Nothing. And yet you had the Russian ambassador on Newsnight, I think you said.
No, actually on Channel 4.
On Channel 4. All right, we're allowed to mention Channel 4 News. Other news programmes are available, but Channel 4 News is perfectly respectable to announce. Good stories this week, in fact. And we had the situation with the Russian ambassador, and it's clear that we took this vote to bomb Islamic State in that part of Syria where they're active. But the Putin, Assad, Hezbollah, Iranian Guard forces are mopping up the either the moderate or the non-Islamic State forces. And we're going to be left in a position where Mr. Putin at one stage is going to say to it's us and Assad versus Islamic State. Well, whose side are you on?
Well, it looks like it might pan out that way, and nobody can have been anything but moved seeing the terrible pictures coming out from the Turkish-Syrian border this week, where people are fleeing that part of Syria, this huge attack on Aleppo, thousands and thousands of civilians turning up at the Turkish border. Turkey, of course, has had an open-door policy, but at this point, they have closed that border and nobody's getting through, apart from the most sick and vulnerable. And of course, this is complicated, big geopolitical discussion that is a difficult thing for backbenchers certainly to raise in kind of small sort of bite-sized questions, shall we say. But if you think about the biggest debate that's actually happening right now over Europe, in this country, The top issue in that, for most politicians, they would say, is about immigration. Of course, that is directly affected by the refugee situation that is unfolding in Syria, sort of at a rate of knots. So, as you suggest, I mean, one senior politician here domestically was saying to me, we're sort of tearing our hair out. They believe that the British government and British politicians should be doing much more to talk about this issue. But right now, at the top of the political parties, there doesn't seem to be that will.
And we urged, the European Union urged Turkey to close its border, its southern border with Syria, to stop them getting in. Now that there's a humanitarian crisis on that border, the European Union is urging Turkey to open the border. Well, I mean, you know,
I think
make up your mind.
I think it's quite difficult to look at what's happened with the European Union, different countries' attitude towards migration over the last few months and conclude that there's very much going on other than a sort of chaotic approach that's not being very effective. You've got some countries putting up borders and then lifting them, closing them, you know, all over the place.
And talk about transit camps
and
being
talk
built
about transit
now.
camps. And of course, earlier this week, the Prime Minister trying to, or suggesting that as part of our debate over migration would be the prospect of having camps, the jungle as it's known in Calais, suddenly arriving on the coast of Kent. So this is an issue here in the biggest debate of the year, but it is not something that as yet sort of punching its way into the chamber.
And it's gone even beyond the argument of another million refugees coming in this year, or migrants, whatever you want to classify them, as a million came in last year, because it is quite clear that as the Assad Putin forces mop up there, people are terrified. They're terrified because they know what they remember what Assad's father was capable of and what he's been capable of and what Russia is capable of. And I was watching some interviews with these refugees. They just need to get out, and there will be a pressure now on millions more to get out there, and it reaches a scale. I mean, I saw there were some reports today that NATO may well have to deploy warships in the Aegean Sea to try and cope with what is now going to be a massive influx. This January alone, 10 times as many people risked that terrible voyage from Turkey into Greece than did in January last year.
Well, it does make you rather wonder when you talk to ministers privately about the timing of the referendum. There's been huge focus on getting the European referendum done at the end of June, in part because there's a fear about there suddenly being a big uptick in the migrant season, as some people call it, and people doing the crossings over the summer. That feels rather misplaced now.
Yes,
this is happening in front
it's
of
a
our
24/7 migrant crisis.
Indeed.
There's another 35 people killed only 24 hours ago.
And what about the camps in Jordan and Lebanon? They are now at capacity or have been, even with the money coming from the government.
The Jordanians just say they can't take any more because they have huge numbers. It does sometimes make our arguments as to whether there should be a refugee camp in Calais or in Kent slightly de minimis.
Well, the humanitarian crisis happening in the Middle East and Northern Africa is quite appalling. You're talking about 50 million plus refugees in that part of the world. And that's why it is important to provide the humanitarian aid in the region, which we have done as a government. £1.1 billion being spent.
And there's another billion from us and more from others coming up too, though, as we know from the secret minutes now of the Turkish president, with Mr. Tusk and with Jean-Claude Juncker, he pointed out, you gave 400 billion to Greece last year.
Well, bailout's a slightly different issue from hard
But you
cash.
see the point, though.
Yes, a huge difference in scale, but of course that money does come back eventually when it's for bailouts. But this is important. £1 billion from us. The agreement reached recently with other European nations about putting more money into humanitarian aid is very important. And that's a better way of deterring, actually, this transit across dangerous journeys across the Mediterranean, which is the alternative.
Except that what is happening would just seem to overwhelm almost everything we do at the It's a daunting prospect.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem. It's one thing giving assistance to the countries that are holding refugees that have come immediately over the border, but as we've heard now, you know, they were absolutely at breaking point. I went out to Jordan very early on in the conflict to see the camps then, and but since then it's absolutely grown exponentially. So it's not enough in itself to just be focusing efforts on giving aid to people there. It's a far bigger issue.
Well, it's a huge issue. One question at question time on it, but at least we spent some time discussing it. Laura, thank you very much. See you next week.
Indeed.
No, there's a recess.
Recess next week.
See you
But
next week.
next week,
the two of you.
crucially though, next week is the summit in Brussels.
It is at the end of the week, isn't
Indeed,
it? Friday.
a week tomorrow. So Wednesday night, I'll be in Brussels looking ahead to the next day, and by the end of the Friday, we may well have the deal. So when we meet again, may all be done.
I'll watch you.
You'll have a
I'll be
copy of
watching you
it.
from New York.
So it's official. Parliament is going vegan and ending its 1,000-year-old tradition of printing Britain's laws on calfskin vellum. It's a move driven by financial rather than ethical concerns. It will save £80,000 a year. But it chimes with the choice of large numbers of people to cut animals and the produce of animals out of their diets, like our guest of the day, Kerry McCarthy here, who is a vegan. But what's wrong with consuming large quantities of cheap, intensively produced meat? Here's Justine Bryant from the Institute of Ideas with her soapbox.
It's difficult to read a weekend supplement today without some posh foodierati shoving down your throat the idea that you need to be eating free-range organic food. Take chicken, for example. It used to be a relatively expensive meat. We used to eat less than a kilo per annum. Today, each person eats about 23 kilos of chicken. The mass production of chicken was begun after the Second World War to move away from rationing and provide enough sustenance and cheap protein for everybody. Today, about 93% of the chicken we buy is produced in the UK and it's factory farmed. The thing about food snobs is their concern about chicken welfare is based on the premise that chickens somehow suffer in the conditions they're kept. And if we all ate free-range organic chicken, they'd be much happier. The problem is, if we move to free-range organic chicken, that means the price of our average Sunday chicken is going to treble in price. That means the cost of our supermarket sandwiches for lunch will increase in price, and that late night fried chicken you get on the way home, that will also increase in price. I can't see any benefit in making people's day-to-day food more expensive. Surely it's about time we celebrated the fact that today we spend less of our disposable income on sustaining ourselves than ever before. When it comes to the food we eat and the choices we make as individuals and for our families, we should be left alone to make those choices guilt-free, not worry about the chickens and the pigs, and celebrate, finally, the freedom that mass food production gives us.
And Justine is with us now. Are you concerned in any way about the welfare of the animals we consume for food? Because you must know, as we all do, that some chickens and pigs are kept in terrible conditions.
Yeah, I mean, farming, animal husbandry, butchery, slaughterhouses, they're very visceral things. They're not pleasant. So to some extent, I would support moves for better welfare for our food production. But to be entirely honest, no. It doesn't occur to me how the chicken's kept when I'm buying my chicken sandwich. I don't think about how the pig's kept when I'm eating a bacon sandwich. It's not my primary concern. It may be other people's, but it's not mine.
You made a claim in the film that the price would treble. I mean, can you stand that up? I mean, do you have evidence that the price would go up that much for a chicken, for example, if we didn't intensively farm?
At the moment, if you buy a free-range organic chicken from any of the large supermarkets, it's around about £12 or £13. I can get a standard British grade A for about £4, even less than that sometimes. So I'm pretty confident that that's right.
I mean, isn't that the problem, Kerry McCarthy? The price would just go up dramatically.
Well, I think the problem with what Justine's saying is she's juxtaposing the very cheap end of the range with the organic, which is very expensive. There's quite a spectrum within that. So you have things like the Red Tractor welfare standards, you have the RSPCA Freedom Food things, which is better animal welfare standards than the very cheap end.
But do you
but
accept
actually
that if
nowhere
we
near as
stop...
pricey as organic?
Sure, I take that there is a broad spectrum, but
Yeah.
do you accept that the price would go up if we didn't intensively farm chickens and pigs?
Yeah, I was at a chicken farm on Thursday, actually, and unfortunately we managed to turn up just after the chickens had all gone off to slaughter, so I didn't see any chickens, but
Bad timing.
I know, bad timing, but 110,000 chickens that had been sent off to slaughter that morning on a 39-day cycle, so that's how long it takes to get get the chicken up to market weight. And that was Red Tractor, so it was higher welfare standards. The farmer was making 2p per chicken. That was their profit on the chicken, and that's why they have to do it in such huge numbers. And they were saying they weren't actually getting much from the supermarket, or they were selling it to one of the intermediary chicken processing. They're not. Although they wanted to abide by higher welfare standards, it's not reflected in the price they get. So my concern, actually, as Shadow Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Secretary, is about farmers. It's one thing to say that keep the cost down for consumers. Supermarkets are generally doing very well, but we're now getting farmers that can't make a living with dairy, they can't make a living with pigs, they can't make a living on a whole range. These people that I visited Thursday had been potato farmers, can't make a living with potatoes now. I mean, that's the issue.
But Justin, sort of philosophically, do we need to eat as much meat? I mean, we didn't used to. It is a fairly modern phenomenon. I mean, it isn't really necessary. So we could reduce the levels of those sorts of animals farmed in that way by just eating less meat. It'd be better for us.
We could all become vegans if we wanted to.
But there's a difference between the two, isn't there?
There is. Whether we need to is not really the issue. It's that I think we are able to now. I think it's impossible to turn the clock back and suggest that we go back to pre-war levels of meat consumption, and I also wouldn't want to. Mass production of food in the UK means that most of us now have a nutritious, healthy diet if we choose to.
Is it healthy, industrial meat production?
Yeah, well, why not? What's wrong with your grade A chicken as opposed to your organic chicken? You may care about the chicken. I don't care about the chicken. I care about the meat I'm consuming.
But I would query on a wider point whether we do. We see now a crisis of childhood obesity. We're seeing diabetes. There's the whole Jamie Oliver campaign about sugar tax. I would question whether we are actually, most of us, having healthy diets, and that goes way beyond whether people eat meat or not.
Thank you. Sorry to rush you. Thanks very much.
No problem.
Now, you're a Eurosceptic Conservative MP, or even a minister. You're not sure which way you'll swing come the referendum. And anyway, the Prime Minister told you you're not to speak out until his renegotiation is a done deal. So what do you say when an impertinent interviewer like Joko here, she's very impertinent, asks you to jump the gun and speak your mind? In a moment, we'll do just that to Nick Gibb. First,
surprise.
we'll just give him an early warning. Here's how some of his colleagues have handled it.
Good morning. Sorry we knocked so early this morning. Have you decided which side you're on? Would you leave the exit campaign?
I think the position is, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the position is very much the same as it was yesterday morning.
I'm not going to put a position down on this in the sense that I say to you this, Andrew, I'm in the business with the Prime Minister of delivering what the Prime Minister said he wanted.
I'm not going to get involved in those negotiations. I'm not going to speculate on them.
What really disappoints me is that people like you would rather look after your own interests than actually come out and lose your cabinet position because he's threatened to sack you. I'm not sure the reporting is entirely accurate.
Note the adverb entirely.
Well, it's where you branch out.
Are against, and those are in favour.
Can I just you consider that?
This is not what I'm trying to say. It's not the issue that I will be deciding on.
Right,
but what I decide on is,
either way,
is it better for the country economically?
Is there anything in it that you do think is very good or positive?
Look, straight talking here. If you don't get free movement and therefore the open door remains the open door, would you be in favour of us leaving the EU rather than carrying on with this situation?
Well, my intention is to ensure that, first of all, we're elected.
It's a very straightforward question. Can you not answer it?
But yeah, let's wait and see when this whole thing is agreed and try and see what it really means. Every bit of it. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's how some have done. How are you going to answer the question?
Well, that will depend on the outcome.
No,
no. Andrew, don't laugh at this. This is about collective responsibility. This is a long-standing tradition. And what David Cameron has done is exceptionally lifted collective responsibility.
But he's campaigning for staying in already.
He's negotiating with the European Union for a better relationship.
But he's also already campaigning to stay in. Look at all the statements he made this week. All these claims about camps moving from Calais to Kent and security is going to be under threat.
This is all part of the negotiations.
Will you let us know first when you finally tell us?
Absolutely.
We'll settle for that. Right, just time to put you out of your misery, give you the answer to guess the year. It was 2010. Please press that red buzzer.
It's the most exciting thing.
Just broke her hand.
And David Pithy from Dalkeith. Well done.
We'll put you in touch with health and safety after the programme. That's it. Thanks to all of our guests, especially our two guests of the day. News starting over on BBC One. Joe and I will be here again with another Daily Politics at noon tomorrow on BBC Two. We hope to see you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I've always been